Hello students, welcome to our second episode of Revision with MCQs Environment. So for the students who have joined us for the first time, this is a Target Prelims 2026 Revision with MCQ series where we are going to revise with the help of MCQs. We'll discuss 10 MCQs on each subject in every episode, and then based on that discussion, you can revise your topics effectively. So today let us begin with the second episode of Environment. Question number 1. Consider the following statements regarding India and the Basel Convention framework. 1. India notified its hazardous waste rules before the Basel Convention on the control of transboundary movements of the hazardous wastes entered into force. 2. India is a party to the Basel Ban Amendment, which enables it to legally prevent developed countries from dumping hazardous and e-wastes within its territory. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? A, 1 only, B, 2 only, C, both 1 and 2, or D, neither 1 nor 2. So please take 10 seconds, attempt this question, and then we will discuss the answer. So here we are talking about the Basel Convention and the Basel Ban Amendment. All right, done? So what is the Basel Convention? Basel Convention actually stops the developed nations from dumping their hazardous wastes into the developing nations, because this used to be a very common practice wherein the developed nations would simply dump their hazardous waste into the developing countries, because there are weaker rules, there are weaker policies in the developing countries in comparison to the developed countries. Enforcement is weaker. That is why it was easier for the developed countries to simply dump their waste into the developing nations. So that's why Basel Convention came into picture in 1989. Okay, but it came into force in 1992. In 1992, when enough countries had ratified it. So post the ratification by enough number of countries, this came into force, it became legally binding. So it happened in 1992. But India already had its own domestic rules on hazardous wastes, on the disposal of hazardous wastes, and this happened in 1989. So India had notified its rules in 1989, whereas the Basel Convention came into force in 1992. So the first statement is correct, because India notified its hazardous waste rules before the Basel Convention came into force. It came into force in 1992. Now, of course, there are amendments that have been made time and again. The initial ones were notified in 1989. Then we have had amendments in 2003 also. We also have the hazardous wastes rule now of 2016. So there are different rules that have been coming into place, but the first one was in 1989. So this statement is correct. Moving on to the second statement, India is a party to the Basel Ban Amendment. Basel Ban Amendment. So this actually is an amendment which completely bans the transboundary movement or the dumping of these hazardous wastes into the developing nations. So ideally what happens is that the developing nations or the area or the country wherein these wastes are being transferred, that country has to be informed, and then the consent should be taken from that country. Only after that you can dump your waste in that country, or you can basically give that waste to the country, and the country can decide if it has to recycle or upcycle, do anything of that sort with that waste. But in the Basel Ban Amendment, this has been completely prohibited, that certain things cannot be absolutely exported to any other country. Certain types of waste cannot be exported. So India, though it is a party to the Basel Convention, it is not a party. It is not a party to the Basel Ban Amendment. Complete prohibition, complete ban, no. India believes in strict regulation. India is following that, but not a complete ban, because then we also have a recycle industry. We also have an e-waste industry. So whatever waste is coming to India, not all waste is completely to be discarded. Some things can be used for recycling, and different things can be generated out of it. So economic loss is going to be there. Then because of this, the recycling industry will suffer. So a lot of jobs will also be lost. So India is not in the favor of a complete ban, though it is in the favor of a strict regulation or strict enforcement and overseeing that no such hazardous waste are simply just dumped without the consent of the developing nation. Okay, so statement 1 is correct, statement 2 is incorrect. So the correct answer is option A, 1 only. Please take a screenshot. Okay. So Basel Convention was adopted in 1989, but it entered into force in 1992. What does it do? It regulates the cross-border movement of hazardous wastes and requires the parties to ensure their environmentally sound management and disposal. Okay, so India was amongst the first countries of the global south in the early 1990s because it had already notified its rules in 1989 before the Basel Convention came into force. Now, to align the domestic legislation with the convention, amendments have been made. I told you that. Amendments have been made in 2000, in 2003 also. And then we have a revised hazardous waste rules in 2008. We also have hazardous and other wastes management and transboundary movement rules of 2016 as well. So India believes in strict regulation, but it is not a complete, there's no complete imposition of a ban. However, there is an imposition of a complete ban on the import of solid plastic waste. Solid plastic waste is the only thing that has been completely banned because it is not environmentally friendly. It causes a lot of environmental issues. It's not biodegradable. That's why the import of solid plastic waste is completely banned by India. Please take a screenshot. Okay, moving on to the second question. Consider the following statements regarding the Rotterdam Convention. 1. The Rotterdam Convention became legally binding on its parties upon its entry into force in 2004. 2. Chemicals listed in Annex 3 of the Rotterdam Convention are subject to the prior informed consent procedure after being banned or severely restricted by at least 2 parties. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? A. 1 only, B. 2 only, C. both 1 and 2, or D. neither 1 nor 2. Please attempt this question. All right. So what is the Rotterdam Convention? Rotterdam Convention deals with the disposal of harmful chemicals and pesticides. Harmful chemicals and pesticides. Same concept that the developed nation should not be simply disposing of their harmful chemicals or pesticides to the developing nations because they have weaker enforcement rules there. So for that we have the Rotterdam Convention, and there is something that's known as prior informed consent. There's a concept of PIC, prior informed consent, that basically means that the country where this waste is being exported or it is going to be disposed, that country should give an informed consent. So you'll have to first tell that country that, okay, this is the chemical or this is the pesticide that we are going to be disposing, and these are the harmful effects of that chemical or that pesticide. So the country can take an informed decision. You'll have to inform them beforehand, and based on that, they'll give you a consent, whether or not they want that chemical or pesticide to be disposed in their country or not. So there is a concept of PIC, or prior informed consent. So the first statement, which says that it becomes legally binding on its parties upon its entry into force in 2004, yes, that is correct. It came in 2004. Now interestingly, there is a concept of Annex 3 chemicals. So a list of chemicals has been given, and certain chemicals have been placed under Annex 3. So the chemicals that have been placed under Annex 3, if they have been banned by at least 2 parties meaning 2 countries, if they have been banned by at least 2 countries, then in that case you will have to get the consent of that of the other country where you're going to dispose this of. So let's say there is the chemical that has been listed in Annex 3. That does not mean that there is going to be a complete ban on its disposal or a complete ban on its export to the other countries, but a prior informed consent will be required, because if there's any chemical that is in Annex 3 and it has been banned by at least 2 countries, then you will have to let the third country in this case know that this is the chemical that has been banned by so and so country because of so and so reasons, the effects that it has, and then based on that the country is going to give the country its consent that whether we want this chemical to come in our country or not. So chemicals listed in Annex 3 of the Rotterdam Convention are subject to prior informed consent procedure, yes, after being banned or severely restricted by at least 2 parties. If they are banned or severely restricted by at least 2 parties, we'll have to get the prior informed consent. So in this case, both the statements are correct. Okay. So it is for certain hazardous chemicals and pesticides in international trade, and it was adopted in 1998 at the Conference of Plenipotentiaries held in Rotterdam, but it entered into force in 2004. So the first statement is correct, and it's a multilateral treaty. It has multiple parties to it. It is aimed at promoting shared responsibility and cooperative efforts in the international trade of hazardous chemicals. Please take a screenshot. So it empowers the importing countries to decide whether to allow or prohibit the import of listed chemicals, while the exporting countries, they are obligated to get the consent of the countries that are going to import this. Now moving on to Annex 3. So Annex 3 includes pesticides and industrial chemicals that have been banned or severely restricted by at least two parties for their health and environmental concerns. So in that case, the country will have to provide its consent. However, inclusion in Annex 3 does not constitute a ban. So there is not an automatic ban. If there is any chemical or a pesticide that is listed under Annex 3, does not simply mean that it is going to be under a complete ban. Import and export can still take place provided consent is being given. So please take a screenshot of this. All right, moving on to the third question. Consider the following statements regarding the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources. 1. The CAMLR Convention applies to Antarctic marine living resources south of the Antarctic Convergence, but its conservation and management measures exclude whales and seals. 2. India is not a full member of CCAMLR. 3. A ceding state neither participates in the decision-making process or the Commission nor contributes to its budget. Which of the statements given above are correct? A, 1 and 2 only, B, 2 and 3 only, C, 1 and 3 only, or D, 1, 2 and 3? Please attempt this question. Alright, so here we are talking about the conservation of marine living resources in the Antarctic. Marine living resources, different types of marine life that we find in the Antarctic region. That needs conservation, right? So for that we have this convention. So the first statement says that it applies to Antarctic marine living resources. Yes, south of the Antarctic Convergence, but its conservation and management excludes whales and seals. Now is this correct? There are whales, there are seals that we find in the Antarctic region. So when we talk about this conservation of marine living resources, is there an exclusion of whales and seals? So yes, there is an exclusion of whales and seals, simply because, not because they are not important, simply because we have other conventions explicitly to protect whales and seals. There are international conventions on the protection of whales and seals. So in order to do away with any duplicacy or redundancy, we have excluded that out of the convention. But other than that, it is focusing on the conservation of the entire marine ecosystem, all the marine living resources, the only exemptions being whales and seals. Second statement says India is not a full member of CCAMLR. No, this is incorrect. India is a member. India is a member of the CCAMLR. Then acceding state. So what are acceding states? Acceding states basically are the states that have joined the convention later. So whenever a convention is formed, it is signed, there are some founding parties to it, people who were originally present, like countries that were originally present in the convention, and then there are countries that are going to join it later. So the later joining countries are acceding states. So the acceding states neither participate in the decision-making process nor contributes to the budget. Yes, this is correct. The acceding states do not contribute to it, only the founding states contribute to this thing. So the correct answer here would be 2 is incorrect. So we have 1 and 3 only, which is C. So please take a screenshot of this. So this convention came into force in 1982 after ratification by enough countries. It has 27 members and India is one of the members. 27 members and 10 acceding states, states that joined later, and India is a member. And acceding states do not participate in the Commission's decision-making process. All right. Now it applies to all the marine living organisms, excluding what? Whales and seals. Because these species, they're very important species and they're already governed by other international conventions like the International Convention for the Regulation of Whaling and the Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Seals. So we already have these two conventions meant for the protection of whales and seals specifically. So please take a screenshot of this as well. All right, moving on. Consider the following statements regarding the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. 1. The framework was adopted at COP15 to the Convention on Biological Diversity. 2. It has 23 action-oriented global targets for urgent action over the decade to 2030. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? A. 1 only, B. 2 only, C. both 1 and 2, or D. neither 1 nor 2. Please attempt this question. Alright, so here we are talking about the Kunming-Montreal Protocol and this global biodiversity framework. The discussions originally started in Kunming, which is in China. So when these discussions started in China, post that in Montreal, there was a final set of targets that was decided. That's why together it's called the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Started in China, concluded in Canada. And in Canada, we decided on targets, action-oriented targets on how to build biodiversity conservation. And there were these 23 action-oriented global targets for urgent action over the decade to 2030. So if you look at the explanation over here, this COP15 to the UN Convention to Biological Diversity, it concluded in Montreal, Canada, started in Kunming, concluded in Canada, and we adopted this biodiversity framework. Now, this biodiversity framework focuses on a roadmap for biodiversity action up to 2030 and consists of 4 long-term goals and 23 action-oriented targets. So we have goals of species conservation, we have a proper 30 by 30 framework wherein we have certain commitments that have to be fulfilled by certain reduction commitments that have to be fulfilled by 2030. So all these things are taken into consideration when we are talking about our goals for 2030. So when we look at the goals over here, key targets. So first we have 13 to 30 commitments. 13 to 30 commitments, that is talking about the restoration of 30% of degraded ecosystems by 2030. 30% of the ecosystem that has been degraded has to be conserved by 2030. Then conserve and manage 30% of the planet's land, inland waters, coastal and marine areas by 2030. Okay, then we have species protection, species and ecosystem protection. For that also we have to halt the extinction of known species by 2050 and reduce extinction risk and rates of all species tenfold. We also have pollution and sustainability targets. So these are all broad targets that we have to bring down pollution, to increase sustainability, to enhance species conservation and also restore degraded land. So please take a screenshot of this first. And then these are the targets. Okay. So reduce pollution from all sources to non-harmful levels for biodiversity by 2030. So these are all targets that have to be achieved by mostly all the targets have to be achieved by 2030. However, there are certain targets that have been extended to 2050 also, like halting the extinction of known species by 2050. And then here we talk about reduction in the establishment of invasive alien species by at least 50% by 2030. So these are basically action-oriented targets that we have for biodiversity conservation. So you should have a broad idea of all the targets so that if they are asked in the statement format, you can answer. Now moving on to the next question. Consider the following statements regarding protocols under the Convention on Biological Diversity. 1. The Nagoya Protocol focuses on fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources. 2. The Cartagena Protocol is an international agreement which aims to ensure the safe handling, disposal and use of living modified organisms. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? A. 1 only, B. 2 only, C. both 1 and 2, or D. neither 1 nor 2. Please attempt this question. We're talking about specific protocols under CBD, Nagoya Protocol and Cartagena Protocol. Okay, so the Nagoya Protocol actually focuses on access and benefit sharing. Access and benefit sharing, equitable sharing, fair and equitable sharing of profits. Now that means, let's say there is a country and that one country made use of other countries' genetic resources, other countries' resources like plants, animals, their wildlife, any particular species or anything of that sort. They made use of it, they generate profit out of that. So that profit will have to be shared with the country, with the other country as well, because they made this profit by making use of the other country's genetic resources. So access and benefit sharing, whatever benefit you have earned, whatever benefit country A has earned, it will have to be shared with country B also, because it was country's B resources that country A used. So the Nagoya Protocol focuses on fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources. Yes. And the Cartagena Protocol. So Cartagena Protocol is actually on biosafety. It is on biosafety, which means that we have to focus on the safe handling of living modified organisms. So whenever there's a transboundary movement of these living modified organisms, a safe handling has to be ensured. So there are certain rules that have been given under this, so that no issue is caused by the movement of these LMOs. So Cartagena Protocol is an international agreement which aims to ensure the safe handling, transport and use of living modified organisms. Yes, this is also correct. So the statements correct over here would be both 1 and 2, answer C. So please take a screenshot. Okay, so the CBD came into force in 1993 and India became a party to it in 1994. Nagoya is on the access to genetic resources and the fair and equitable sharing of benefits. Access and benefit sharing. Now, if we talk about the Cartagena Protocol, it is on biosafety, and this is for the safe handling, transport and use of living modified organisms produced through modern biotechnology, particularly those that may pose risks to biological diversity and human health. So this was adopted in 2000 and it entered into force in 2003. All right. Moving on to the next question, consider the following funds. 1. Special Climate Change Fund. 2. Least Developed Countries Fund. 3. Adaptation Fund. And 4. Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. How many of the above are managed by the Global Environment Facility? Okay. A. Only 1. B. Only 2. C. Only 3. D. All 4. Please attempt this question. All right, so here we are talking about the funds that are managed by the Global Environment Facility, the GEF. GEF, we know this is a huge fund that is managed by the World Bank. So GEF originally was created by the World Bank, by the UNDP and by the UNEP, United Nations Development Program and United Nations Environment Program. Right now it is managed by the World Bank. So the trustee is the World Bank, and it takes care of multiple funds, different funds are being funded by this huge pool of funds that we have, that is the Global Environment Facility. So Special Climate Change Fund, yes. Least Developed Countries Fund, yes. Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, yes. Adaptation Fund, no. So Special Climate Change Fund, this focuses on providing all sorts of help, especially to the developing countries that they need to deal with climate change. So whatever technological help they need, whatever money they need for that, whatever money they need for adapting to the changes because of climate change, these countries are provided that, and this is funded by the GEF. Least Developed Countries Fund, yes, all the countries that are the least developed countries, they require additional support. So that fund is also taken care of by the GEF. Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, this is also taken care of by the GEF. But Adaptation Fund was introduced under the Kyoto Protocol. Under the Kyoto Protocol, and this is not funded by the GEF. So if we look at the explanation over here, first of all, please take a screenshot. So the GEF is actually a multilateral financial institution. So it has like the governments, it has development institutions, it has a lot of parties that come into play, and a lot of countries, developed countries, developing countries, in fact, least developed countries. So it's a multilateral fund that we have over here. It consists of 32 members. The council, the GEF council that manages GEF, it consists of 32 members, which have the OECD countries, developing countries, and also 2 countries from the Central and Eastern Europe. And this was originally constituted by the World Bank, the UNDP, and the UNEP, right? Now, if we talk about these funds, so there are several thematic funds that are there, like we have the Least Developed Countries Fund that is under this. Then we have the Special Climate Change Fund, which supports adaptation and technology transfer across all the developing countries that are parties to UNFCCC. Then we have the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, and this was created to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So we have these targets, action targets, we just discussed those 23 action targets. For achieving those action targets, developing countries, especially the developing countries and the least developed countries, are going to need help in order to meet those targets. So all that help would be provided by the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. All right. And in contrast, the Adaptation Fund, it is not managed by GEF. However, it is overseen by the Adaptation Fund Board, which comprises of 16 members, 16 alternates, and meets twice annually. It actually came into force under the Kyoto Protocol. So this is a separate fund. This is a separate fund. Okay, moving on to the next question. Consider the following statements regarding the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. 1. Hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, though not ozone depleting, were brought under the Kigali Amendment due to their high global warming potential. 2. Under the Kigali Amendment, India will achieve a cumulative reduction of 85% in HFC production and consumption by 2040. Which of the statements given above is or are correct? A. 1 only, B. 2 only, C. both 1 and 2, or D. neither 1 nor 2. Please attempt this question. All right, so here we are talking about the Montreal Protocol and the Kigali Amendment. So Montreal Protocol focuses on the ozone depleting substances. It focused on the reduction of the ozone depleting substances so that the harmful effects that we see on the ozone layer, the ozone hole depletion ozone hole expansion that we are seeing, that can be reduced. So when we talk of ozone depleting substances, we talk of chlorofluorocarbons, hydrochlorofluorocarbons. These are the main ozone depleting substances. So under Montreal Protocol, there was a reduction ban that was introduced on CFCs and HCFCs because we wanted to have safer alternatives. It was said that we'll have to do away with the use of chlorofluorocarbons and hydrochlorofluorocarbons and introduce safer alternatives. Safer alternatives like the hydrofluorocarbons or HFCs. So these are usually found in our refrigerants, air conditioning. So it was basically said that we'll have to do away with this and look forward for safer alternatives like HFCs. So under the Montreal Protocol, we talked on the introduction of HFC so that ozone can be saved. But under the Kigali Amendment that we have, this was also regulated. Under the Kigali Amendment, it was said that HFC regulation will also be taken under consideration because though HFCs, they are not ozone depleting, but they have a very high global warming potential. They have a very high global warming potential. Global warming potential meaning how much global warming can one gas cause, meaning how much of greenhouse gas can how many greenhouse gases or what is the amount of greenhouse gas a particular gas can capture in a specific period of time. That specific period of time is usually 100 years and it is compared with the global warming potential of CO2. Global warming, all the gases, the global warming potential of all the gases is compared with the global warming potential of CO2. When we say GWP is 12 or 13 or 40, it means it is 12, 13 or 40 times the GWP of CO2. So here it was noticed that HFCs, though they are not ozone depleting themselves, but they have a huge global warming potential. So they're going to cause a lot of global warming, and that is also not something that we want. That's why these were also brought under the ambit of the original Montreal Protocol by the Kigali Amendment. So HFCs, though not ozone depleting, were brought under the Kigali Amendment due to their high global warming potential. Yes. Under the Kigali Amendment, India will achieve a cumulative reduction of 85% in HFC production and consumption by 2040. So under the Kigali Amendment, India has certain goals, yes, certain reduction goals when it comes to HFCs, but there are different goals that we have to achieve in different phases. And this 85% reduction goal that we're talking about, it has to be achieved by 2047 and not 2040. So the correct answer here would be 1 is correct, 2 is incorrect. So 1 only. Let's look at the explanation. Please take a screenshot. Okay, so HFCs were originally introduced as non-ozone depleting substances for earlier refrigerants like CFCs and HCFCs. But they have a very high global warming potential ranging from 12 to 14,000, which makes them serious contributors to climate change. So they are also going to bring adverse effects to our climate. Now, because of this, India is also committed to a 4-stage phase down in 2032. This plan is to begin, and we have to achieve targets in 4 phases, like 10% reduction by 2032, 20% reduction by 2037, 30% reduction by 2042, and 85% reduction by 2047. 85% by 2047. All right. Moving on to the 8th question, consider the following greenhouse gases: carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur hexafluoride, nitrous oxide. How many of the above gases are listed under the Kyoto Protocol? Only 1, only 2, all 3, only 3 or all 4? Please attempt this question. All right. So what is the Kyoto Protocol? Kyoto Protocol actually talks about emission reduction targets. It's about giving emission reduction targets mostly to the industrialized nations because they're contributing a lot to the global warming. The emission of greenhouse gases is increasing, and that's causing global warming. That's why these are some emission reduction targets that have been given to the developed countries or the industrialized countries or the Annex 1 countries. Okay, so when we talk about the gases, is CO2 included? Yes. Methane included? Yes. Sulfur hexafluoride? Yes. And nitrous oxide? Yes. So all the gases have been included under the Kyoto Protocol, and all there are emission reduction targets that we are giving to the developed countries, and all these gases, there is going to be a reduction on all these gases, on the emission of all these gases. They are also included in the target. So the correct answer here would be D, all 4. Please take a screenshot. Okay. So this Kyoto Protocol came in 1997, and it has given targets to the developed countries or the industrialized countries. For example, they have to achieve an average 5% reduction, average of 5% below the 1990 levels, and a commitment period was also given. The initial commitment period was 2008 to 2012. So there were greenhouse gas emission reduction targets that it should be below, and the average should be below 5%, 5% below the 1990 levels, and the commitment level was the commitment period was 2008 to 2012. But this period later on was increased, it was expanded, and at the 2012 UN Climate Change Conference, the parties agreed to extend the protocol's operation till 2020. So originally it was 2008 to 2012, and then it moved to 2020. Okay, as of now we have 192 parties. 192 parties to the organization, and it covers several greenhouse gases. Though all the greenhouse gases are regulated, like carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and hydrofluorocarbons, perfluorocarbons, sulfur hexafluoride. So all these gases are covered under the Kyoto Protocol. Moving on to the 9th question. Now we have certain mechanisms under Kyoto. So mechanism and their description. 1. Clean development mechanism allows an Annex B party. Annex B parties are also developed or industrialized countries. Allows an Annex B party to implement emission reduction projects in developing countries. Joint implementation enables an Annex B party to earn emission reduction units from projects in another Annex B party. And 3, emissions trading permits countries with surplus emission units to sell them to countries exceeding their targets. How many of the above pairs are correctly matched? A, only 1, B, only 2, C, all 3, or D, none? Please attempt this question. Here we are talking about the mechanisms that we have under Kyoto Protocol and what are those going to do. All right, so let's talk about the first one, Clean Development Mechanism or CDM. Now, what is Kyoto Protocol? I told you that under this, we are going to give emission reduction targets for greenhouse gases to the developed nations or the industrialized nations or the Annex 1 nations or Annex 1 parties, so that they can bring down their greenhouse gas emission. So the first mechanism that we have, that is Clean Development Mechanism. Yes, it does allow an Annex B party. Annex B is also for the Annex B actually are most of the parties that are already covered in Annex 1, but here the Annex B parties are given specific targets. Annex 1 covers most of the industrialized nations, but Annex B is a list of all those industrialized nations which have been given certain targets. So these Annex B countries can implement emission reduction projects in developing countries under the Clean Development Mechanism. Yes. So if they are going to fund, for example, there's an Annex B party. If that party funds a clean development project in one of the developing nations is building something to help reduce the harmful effects of climate change, but they do not have enough funds. But if an Annex B party is going to fund that for the developing nation, then in that case also they are going to earn certain units, which are the certified emission reduction units. Certified emission reduction units that will be counted in their Kyoto Protocol targets. So there are targets that have been given, emission reduction targets have been given. So in order to achieve those targets, these CERs can also be obtained. How will that be obtained? When an Annex B party is going to fund a clean energy project in a developing nation. So this is CDM. CDM is correct. Joint implementation. Joint implementation enables an Annex B party to earn emission reduction units from projects in another Annex B party. Yes. So in the first one, we were talking about developing countries, that Annex B country is funding a developing countries project. In the second case, in joint implementation, Annex B country is funding the project of another Annex B country only. So because let's say there was any shortage of funds or they want to do a joint implementation of certain things, in that case also this first Annex B country is going to receive emission reduction units because it has helped another nation achieve their climate targets, help the other nations bring down their greenhouse gas emissions. So that's why also they will be rewarded. In joint implementation, we are talking about two Annex B countries. And then emissions trading. Trading, as the name suggests, there is going to be a trading of these carbon units. If there's any country that has surplus, it can sell their surplus to the other country that is in deficit. Let's say a country was allowed certain units of emission that could be made, but the country did not completely utilize the emission targets or the emission units, and they are still left with certain emission units. They managed to complete everything without making use of the entire emission units pool that was allowed to them. So they already have that surplus. Now they can further gain from that surplus by selling that surplus to another country which is in shortage of these emission units. So trading can take place over here. So it permits countries with surplus emission units to sell them to countries exceeding their targets. So because every country over here, whether developed or developing, they're allowed certain emission units. Certain emission is allowed to each one of them. And if one country has not utilized all the emission units, they did a great job and they saved certain emission units. They can sell those emission units and achieve further money, earn further money. So this is what happens under emissions trading. So this is also correct. Which of the pairs are correctly matched? All the three. Please take a screenshot. All right, moving on to the last question. Which of the following established the National Greenhouse Gas Inventories Program? A, United Nations Development Program. B, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. C, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And D, Global Environment Facility. So please attempt this question. So here we are talking about the National Greenhouse Gas Inventories Program. So this is like a standardized program which which basically measures the emission. Every country has been allowed certain emission. We discussed that. And every country, how are these different countries measuring their emissions? If their methods are going to be different, then a lot of chaos is going to happen. So in order to that, we have to standardize the entire process, standardize the process of measuring emissions, and then create an inventory out of it so that the emissions can be further reduced. But for that, we should have a proper accounting should happen. Accounting of emissions should happen, and for that we need to have a standard process, and that standardized process is the National Greenhouse Gas Inventories Program. And this program was established by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So please look at the explanation. Take a screenshot first. Okay, so IPCC was established in 1998 by the WMO plus UNEP. WMO plus UNEP together they formed the IPCC. And under IPCC, in order to ensure consistency and accuracy in climate reporting, we'll have to report, right? We'll have to report how many emissions are happening country-wise and what should be our reduction targets, global targets going forward. So proper climate reporting has to happen. And to ensure consistency and accuracy in that climate reporting, IPCC set up the National Greenhouse Gas Inventories Program, which develops standardized methodologies for estimating national greenhouse gas emissions and removals and promotes the uniform application of IPCC guidelines by the countries. All right. So that was all for today's discussion. I hope you were able to gain something out of the lecture. Now let's look at a practice question for prelims. Which of the following national parks is unique for being a floating swamp with vegetation that supports rich biodiversity? A. Bhitarkanika National Park. B. Kebul Lamjau National Park. C. Keoladeo Ghana National Park. Or D. Sultanpur National Park. Please attempt this question and provide your answers in the comment section. Thank you for watching.
For more informative content, like, share and subscribe, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the notifications.